The only thing I owned in this world was my silence, a fragile shield I kept locked behind my teeth. But tonight, standing before the Alpha King, I knew my cage was about to break. Chapter 1. A Crown of Cinders. The only thing I owned was my silence, and they were coming to take that too. A bone-deep chill, the kind that had nothing to do with the morning air, snaked up my spine because the entire pack was buzzing. It wasn't the usual hum of chores or the low grumble of warriors training. This was different. This was the sharp metallic scent of fear. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I kept my head down. My world shrunk to the grimy flagstones I scrubbed, the motion of my arm a familiar ache. Scrub, rinse, repeat. It was a rhythm that kept the memories at bay, a punishment that felt like safety because it was predictable. Have you ever felt so small that fading into the floorboards felt like the grandest ambition you could have? That was my life. From this lowly vantage point, the world was a collection of scuffed boots and dirty hems. I knew everyone by the sound of their footsteps. Kyle, our alpha, had a heavy, arrogant tread that crushed stone and spirit alike. His mate, Lyra, moved with a slithering grace, her steps silent until she was right behind you, her voice a whip of sweet poison. Her shadow fell over me now, long and thin like a blade. "Look at it," she purred, the sound a low vibration in the air. Barely a wolf at all, just a stray dog he keeps for sport. Her words didn't cut anymore. They were just noise, like the wind. I didn't look up, didn't flinch, didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction because my reactions were not my own to give. They belonged to Kale. Continuing from that thought, I focused on a stubborn bit of grime, channeling all my energy into that tiny spot. My knuckles were raw, my back a landscape of old pains and new ones. In the quiet of my mind, a little tune surfaced, a melody without words, soft and sad, a ghost of a lullaby from a life I couldn't remember. Where did it come from? The fragment of a song was the only beautiful thing left inside me, a secret garden in a wasteland. The great hall doors boomed open, the sound echoing like a death knell. Kyle's voice, a gravelly roar that commanded instant obedience, filled the space. "The king arrives at sundown. This place will shine like a dragon's hoard, or I will have your hides for rugs, every last one of you." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through my numbness. The king. The Alpha King. King Hadrian. A name spoken in hushed, terrified whispers across all the territories. He was a legend, a monster, a savior, depending on who you asked. To us, he was the wolf who could swallow the moon. His visit meant scrutiny. It meant perfection. And for Omegas like me, perfection was an impossible standard, because our very existence was seen as an imperfection. Any mistake, any flaw, would be magnified under a king's gaze. It would bring a wrath down upon us that would make Kale's daily cruelties feel like a caress. I scrubbed harder, my muscles screaming in protest, a desperate prayer forming on my lips. Let him not see me. Let me be a shadow. Let me be nothing. Later, as the sun began to bleed across the sky in hues of orange and violet, the preparations grew more frantic. The air thickened with the smells of roasting pig, pine incense, and nervous sweat. I was tasked with polishing the silver until my reflection stared back at me. A haunted, hollow-eyed girl with dirt-smudged cheeks and hair the color of ash. A ghost in the metal. It was then that a strange scent, something I'd only ever caught on the wind on the rarest of days, drifted through an open window. It was wild and clean, like a forest of pine trees after a winter storm. Deep, powerful. It made the timid wolf inside me stir for the first time in years, a confused, yearning ache in my chest. What was that smell? It felt important, like a memory I was supposed to have but didn't. This strange new feeling was a dangerous spark in the tinderbox of my world, a world where any spark could lead to an inferno. Chapter 2. The Alpha's Feast. The great hall was a beast of light and sound. Roaring fires in the hearths cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the tapestries of old battles seem to writhe and bleed. The long tables groaned under the weight of the feast. Mountains of meat, rivers of wine, glistening fruits piled high. Hundreds of wolves from the pack, dressed in their finest leathers and furs, filled the benches, their laughter loud and brittle. They were all on display, a show of strength and prosperity for the king, and in the center of it all, on a throne of carved oak, sat King Hadrian. He was nothing like the monster my imagination had conjured. There was no fire in his eyes, no overt cruelty in his posture. Instead, he radiated a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. Power rolled off him in palpable waves, silencing conversations as his gaze swept the room. He was a king not because he was the loudest, but because when he was present, everything else became quiet. His eyes, the color of molten gold, seemed to miss nothing. I made myself small, a mouse in a den of lions, my tray of wine goblets held tight in trembling hands. My only goal was to be a ghost, to drift through the spaces between people, refill their cups, and vanish again. Following that simple plan, I moved along the edges of the hall, my bare feet silent on the cold stone. The noise, the smells, the sheer number of dominant wolves in one place. It was an assault on my senses. I could feel their collective power pressing in, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. Lyra was watching me. I didn't need to see her to know. It was a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a promise of pain. She was seated near the high table, a vision in black fur, her smile a slash of red in her pale face. She was a viper, and I was the mouse she loved to play with. Because I was distracted by her stare, I didn't see the warrior's boot until it was too late. He stretched his leg out, a casual, deliberate movement. My foot caught. The world tilted sideways in a sickening lurch. The heavy silver tray slipped from my grasp, and time seemed to slow down. I saw the arc of red wine as it flew through the air, a beautiful, deadly comet aimed directly at the king's table. It crashed against the pristine white tunic of a neighboring alpha, a visiting lord, splashing like blood. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence fell over the hall. The laughter died. The music stopped. Every single head turned. Every pair of eyes, hundreds of them, fixed on me. On the clumsy, worthless Omega kneeling in a puddle of spilled wine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. "This is it," a voice in my head whispered. "This is the end." Kale was on his feet in an instant, his face a mask of thunderous fury. He crossed the space in 3 long strides, his presence a suffocating storm. He grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head back until my neck screamed in protest. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and shameful. "Your Majesty," Kale said, his voice a low growl, but his eyes were on me, filled with a cruel, triumphant light. "My sincerest apologies. This thing is a clumsy, useless creature, but perhaps it can offer you some entertainment as an apology." He dragged me toward the center of the hall, my feet stumbling to keep up. The eyes followed me, 100 points of judgment and contempt. What did he mean? Entertainment. My blood ran cold, a frozen river of dread. He shoved me forward and I fell to my knees on the stone floor right before the king's dais. The king hadn't moved. He just watched me, his golden eyes unreadable, his expression carved from stone. Kyle smirked, a terrible, sharp-toothed expression. "It has a hidden talent, you see. It sings." He leaned down, his hot breath ghosting over my ear, a whisper meant only for me. "Sing for him, little bird. Sing, or I will break your wings for good." This was his true plan, the ultimate humiliation he had been waiting for. Chapter 3. A song in the silence sing. The word was a death sentence. In a world of growls and snarls, where power was shown through strength and dominance, a song was a thing of weakness. It was a thing of humans. For an Omega, the lowest of the low, to perform such a soft, vulnerable act in a court of predators. It was an invitation for mockery, for scorn, for violence. It was Kale's way of stripping away the last shred of my dignity, of showing the king just how thoroughly he had broken the last remnant of the Silver Crescent Pack. He wasn't just punishing me for spilling wine, he was using my soul as a political statement. My throat closed up. A choked, strangled sound was the only thing that escaped my lips. I shook my head, a small, desperate gesture. No. Please, not this. Not my last secret. Not the one thing I held on to in the dark. Kale's patience snapped. His hand tightened in my hair, a sharp, searing pain exploding at my scalp. I said, "Sing!" he roared, the sound bouncing off the silent walls of the hall. The warriors at his side took a step forward, their expressions hard and merciless. I had no choice. There was no escape. Closing my eyes, I shut out the sea of hostile faces, the cold gaze of the king, the triumphant smirk of my alpha. I retreated into the one safe place I had left, the darkness behind my eyelids. And there, in the quiet of my terror, the little melody surfaced, the ghost of a lullaby. Where had I even learned it? A forgotten warmth, a gentle hand, a soft voice humming in a sunlit room. The memory was a phantom limb, an ache for a life I couldn't grasp. I opened my mouth, and what came out was not the pathetic squeak they expected. It was a whisper of a sound, fragile and thin, but clear as a winter stream. The notes were broken, laced with the sorrow of 1,000 lonely nights, yet they held a strange, haunting purity. It was the song of a ghost, a melody of a life stolen away. I sang of moonlight on silver fur, of a home I couldn't picture, of a love I could barely remember. I poured all the pain, all the loneliness, all the quiet resilience of my shattered soul into that one simple tune. My voice grew a little stronger, not in volume, but in feeling. It filled the oppressive silence of the hall, a tiny silver thread in a vast, dark tapestry. The world had fallen away. There was only the song. Then, something shifted. A change in the very air. A low sound, a vibration that started in the floor and resonated deep in my bones. It was a growl, but it wasn't Kale's familiar, hateful rumble. This was deeper, more powerful. It was a sound of primal possession, of thunder breaking deep within the earth. My eyes fluttered open. Every wolf in the hall was frozen, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. But their fear wasn't directed at me. It was aimed at the high table, at their king. King Hadrian was on his feet. The terrifying stillness was gone, replaced by a predatory intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. His golden eyes were blazing, fixed on me with a hungry, shocking focus. The growl was ripping from his chest, a raw, untamed sound of pure, undiluted fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped the table, the thick wood groaning under the pressure. The air crackled with his power, a suffocating electric force. And then his gaze met mine, and across the vast, silent hall, a single word thundered, a command that was not a request, a claim that was not a question, a word that shattered my world for the second time in one night. Mine. Chapter 4. King's Claim, Omega's Cage. The world narrowed to a single point of heat, the king's body shielding mine. His scent, pine and winter and a storm held on a leash, was overwhelming, a thick blanket that suffocated all other smells. My cheek was pressed against the hard muscle of his chest, and I could feel the thunder of his heart, a rhythm that matched the primal growl still vibrating in the air. Time seemed to stretch and snap. One moment, I was kneeling in shame. The next, I was the epicenter of a political earthquake. Kale's face was a mask of disbelief turning into purple fury. Lyra's perfect red lips were parted in a silent, ugly snarl. "You will release my Omega, Your Majesty." Cale bit out, his voice dangerously low. King Hadrian didn't even look at him. His golden eyes were still locked on me, and what I saw in them wasn't kindness. It was possession. It was the look of a wolf who had just found the one thing in the world he would kill for. He moved, turning me slightly so I was tucked behind him. A wall of royal guards, clad in black and silver armor, materialized around us, their faces grim and their hands on their swords. They moved with a silent, deadly efficiency that made Kyle's warriors look like clumsy pups. "You're Omega?" The king's voice was soft, but it carried a chilling weight that cut through the tension. "I think you'll find you are mistaken, Alpha Cale. This is my mate, and you will address your future queen with respect." The word queen hit the room like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Queen? Me? A broken, worthless thing from the kennels? It was impossible. A cruel joke. I wanted to laugh or scream or both. My mind felt like it was splintering into 1,000 pieces because nothing made sense. This had to be a dream, a nightmare from which I would wake up back on my thin straw pallet, the scent of fear my only blanket. Have you ever been so terrified that your own body feels like a stranger's? Without another word to Kyle, the king started moving. His hand was a firm, inescapable brand on my arm, guiding me toward the great hall doors. The pack parted before us like a river splitting around a great stone. No one met our eyes. The silence was heavier than any shout. I stumbled, my bare feet clumsy on the cold floor. He didn't slow down. He just held me up, his strength absolute. I risked a glance back. Cale stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face a portrait of pure, murderous humiliation. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would never, ever forgive this. The journey to the capital was a blur of velvet darkness and rumbling wheels. I was in a royal carriage, a cage on wheels seated across from the king himself. He hadn't spoken a single word since we left. He just watched me. That intense, golden gaze felt like a physical weight, pinning me to the seat. I tried to make myself smaller, to shrink into the corner, to become a shadow again. But there was nowhere to hide. The carriage was filled with his scent, his power, his silence. 1,000 questions screamed in my head. Why? What does he want? Is he as cruel as Cale? But my voice was a trapped bird in my throat, too afraid to sing, too afraid to even chirp. Outside, the world I knew disappeared into the night, and a new, terrifying future rushed forward to meet us. Chapter 5: The Gilded Cage and the Golden Eyes. The royal capital wasn't a city. It was a monument to power. Towers of pale stone pierced the sky, their tips catching the first light of dawn like crowns of fire. The castle itself was a mountain of black rock and shimmering glass, a beast of a fortress that seemed to hold the entire sky on its shoulders. It made the Shadow Moon Pack's great hall look like a dog's kennel. As the carriage rolled through the massive gates, I felt a new kind of smallness. Not the smallness of an Omega, but the smallness of an ant before a giant. King Hadrian led me through endless, echoing hallways. The floors were polished marble that reflected our images like a dark lake. Tapestries depicting legendary hunts and ancient shifter kings covered the walls. Everything was vast, cold, and silent. He finally stopped before a set of ornate wooden doors, pushing them open to reveal a suite of rooms that were larger than the entire building I'd slept in my whole life. A huge bed with silks and furs, a crackling fireplace, and a balcony that overlooked the entire city. It was beautiful, and it was the most terrifying cage I had ever seen. "You will be safe here," he said, his voice startling me after the long silence. He gestured to the room. "Anything you need, you will have." I just stared, my throat too dry to speak. Safe? I didn't know what that word meant. He seemed to understand. He was overwhelming me. A flicker of something, frustration, confusion, crossed his face. "I will leave you to rest." He turned to go, and the moment he stepped across the threshold of the room, a sharp, violent pain lanced through my chest. It felt like my soul was being torn in two. I gasped, clutching my heart, a strangled cry escaping my lips. At the same time, the king staggered, a low growl ripping from him as he braced himself against the doorframe. His knuckles were white. What was happening? He turned back, his golden eyes wide with a dawning, shocked understanding. He looked at me, then at the space between us, and then back at me. "The bond," he murmured, his voice rough. He took a hesitant step back into the room, and the pain receded slightly. Another step. It lessened again. It was magic, a cruel, invisible chain that tied us together. I realized with a fresh wave of horror that I was not just his prisoner, I was his anchor. We were trapped. Together. This new reality was still sinking in when a woman's sharp, commanding voice cut through the air. "Hadrian, what is the meaning of this?" A tall she-wolf with silver-streaked hair and eyes the same gold as the king's, but colder, stood in the hallway. This must be Lady Seraphina, his sister. Her gaze swept over me, and it was not kind. It was calculating, dismissive, the look of a wolf assessing a sick stray that her brother had dragged home. Later that day, Hadrian the king, made his decree. He gathered the entire royal court in the throne room. I had to stand beside him, trembling in borrowed silks that felt like a costume. His voice boomed, filled with absolute authority. "This is Athena, my mate, your future queen." He let the words sink in, his gaze sweeping over the hundreds of assembled lords and ladies. Her past is ashes. Her life before this moment is dust. Anyone who speaks of it, anyone who shows her anything less than the absolute respect she is owed, will answer directly to me. He paused, and his voice dropped to a lethal growl. "And I promise you, you will not enjoy it." It was a promise of safety wrapped in a threat of violence. But as I saw the calculating look in his sister's eyes and felt the invisible chain of the bond humming between us, I had to wonder, who was he trying to protect me from? Them? Or himself? Chapter 6. The first spark days bled into a strange, timeless rhythm. I existed in the gilded cage of my rooms, a ghost haunting the king's castle. Servants brought me food I was too afraid to eat, and dresses I felt too worthless to wear. Harry, I couldn't think of him as the king when he was near, was a constant, silent presence. The bond demanded it. He would sit in a chair by the fire, reading reports or staring into the flames, while I would huddle on the far side of the room, near the balcony. We were two planets locked in a silent, tense orbit. The silence was better than Kale's cruelty, but it was just a different kind of empty. But I was starting to notice things. The way a young kitchen maid, barely more than a pup, flinched whenever a certain lord with a booming voice and cruel eyes walked by. I saw him corner her in the hallway one afternoon when I was drifting through the castle, my silent steps allowing me to go unseen. He was sneering, his hand clamped on her arm. "A little scrap like you should learn her place," he was hissing. And something inside me snapped. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a show of power. It was just a tiny, sharp sound like a piece of glass breaking. Before I even knew what I was doing, I stepped out from behind the tapestry. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. My voice was a timid whisper, but in the quiet hall it sounded like a shout. "Let her go." The Lord turned, his face a mask of disbelief. Him? Being addressed by me? The king's strange, silent pet? He sneered. "And who are you to give me orders?" I remembered the throne room, the weight of Harry's words, "Your future queen." The title felt like a stolen coat, too big and heavy for my shoulders, but it was the only weapon I had. I lifted my chin, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "She is under my protection," I said, the words shaky but clear. I didn't know where they came from. They just appeared. The Lord's eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty, of fear in their depths. He was cruel, but he wasn't stupid. He let the girl go and stalked away, muttering under his breath. The little maid looked at me with wide, grateful eyes before scurrying off. I stood there, my entire body trembling with the aftershock of what I had just done. I had spoken, I had acted, and I had won. This small, terrifying victory lit a tiny spark inside me. Later that evening, a servant brought my dinner. It was a rich, heavy stew, the kind Harry always ate. I hated it. It reminded me of the feasts at Shadow Moon, of the scraps I used to fight for. When Harry entered the room, he saw the untouched plate. "You should eat," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet command. The old me would have obeyed without a thought. The old me would have forced down every last bite, grateful to not be starving. But I was not the old me, not entirely. I looked at him, my hands clasped in my lap. The spark of defiance, small as it was still warm. I took a breath. No. The word was so soft I almost thought I'd only imagined it, but it hung in the air between us, shocking and absolute. Harry froze. His golden eyes widened, and for the first time, he looked at me not as a broken prize to be protected, but as a wolf. A wolf who had just spoken her mind. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. He wasn't angry. He looked surprised, and maybe, just maybe, a little intrigued. It was a tiny shift, a barely perceptible change in the balance of power between us, but it felt like the whole world had just tilted on its axis. Chapter 7. A Whisper of the Past. My small act of defiance, that single whispered no, had changed the weather in our gilded cage. Harry, the king, no longer just occupied the space across from me. He started watching me. It wasn't the cold, possessive gaze from before. This was different. It was a focused, searching look, the way a wolf tracks a scent on the wind. It was unnerving. He started testing me, in his own quiet way. Instead of the heavy stews, a servant would bring a tray with 3 different meals: a light broth, grilled fish, a simple plate of bread and cheese. He would say nothing, but his golden eyes would track which dish I reached for. He brought me a lute one afternoon, its wood smooth and pale. He just set it on a table and left, watching from the doorway to see if I would touch it. I didn't. The thought of making music, even for myself, sent a tremor of old fear through me. This new attention was a strange kind of pressure, a puzzle I couldn't solve. What did he want from me? What was he looking for? His focus soon narrowed to the one thing I had spent years trying to forget: the ugly, faded scar over my heart. It was a swirling, intricate pattern, a brand Cale had given me so long ago I couldn't even remember the pain. To me, it was just a mark of my worthlessness. But Harry saw something else. I caught him staring at it one morning when I was in a simple shift, his expression a dark knot of suspicion and anger. "Who gave that to you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I flinched, instinctively covering the spot with my hand. "Alpha Cale," I whispered. "A long time ago." "It is not a normal scar," he stated, his eyes narrowing. "The edges, they are too perfect. It feels like rot." I didn't know what to say. It was a part of my shame, a symbol of my brokenness. Why did he care? His obsession with my past grew. He started spending long hours with his beta, Gareth, and his sister, Lady Seraphina, in the war room. Their voices would be low murmurs, but I could feel the tension. Gareth would often look at me with a soft, pitying expression. "Your Majesty," I overheard him say to Harry once, his tone laced with concern. "You are upsetting her. Perhaps it is best to let old wounds lie." But Seraphina was different. Her cold gaze had turned thoughtful. She watched me now with a sharp, analytical curiosity, as if I were a riddle she was determined to solve. She saw the same wrongness in the scar that Harry did. One evening, Harry stood before me, his decision made. His jaw was set, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light that made my breath catch. "I have sent my best trackers back to the Shadow Moonlands," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "They will not return until they find out what he did to you, what that mark is." He was digging into my past, into the one place I never wanted to revisit. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to tell him to stop, to leave the ghosts buried. But I couldn't, because a small, treacherous part of me, the part that remembered a phantom lullaby and a scent of pine on the wind, wanted to know the truth just as badly as he did. Chapter 8. The Name of the Singer. The trackers were gone for what felt like an eternity. During that time, a fragile truce settled between me and the king. He didn't push me, didn't ask any more questions. We simply existed in our shared space, the air thick with unspoken anticipation. The pain of the bond had lessened into a dull, constant ache, a reminder of the invisible chain that connected us. I even had a short, stilted conversation with Lady Seraphina. She asked me about the fabrics of my dresses, her questions sharp and precise. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation, but it was contact. It was something. Then, one night, they returned. They didn't come back with just stories. They brought a heavy, iron-bound chest, its wood dark and stained with age. It had been pulled from a hidden chamber beneath Cale's throne room. Harry had it brought to his private study, and he summoned me, along with Seraphina and an ancient, wrinkled she-wolf with eyes like chips of obsidian. She was the court mystic, the keeper of their lore. The air in the study was thick with the smells of old leather, beeswax, and a rising sense of dread. "It is sealed with dark magic, my king," the mystic rasped, her hand hovering over the chest. "Blood magic." Harry's expression was grim. "Open it." With a low chant, the mystic placed her hands on the lock. A faint, sickly green light pulsed, and with a groan of protesting metal, the chest swung open. Inside, there were no jewels, no gold, only a collection of rotting, leather-bound journals. Cale's journals. As Harry opened the first one, a cold, clinical script filling the page, the mystic's attention was on me. She moved closer, her obsidian eyes fixed on the brand over my heart. She reached out a trembling, claw-like hand, and I flinched back. "Do not be afraid, little one," she whispered. She didn't touch me. Her finger just traced the shape in the air. I have seen this mark only once before, in a scroll that was thought to be a myth. Her eyes widened. The silencing sigil. At the same time, Harry let out a choked, furious sound. He looked up from the journal, his face pale, his golden eyes burning with an incandescent rage that was terrifying to behold. "Silver Crescent," he bit out, the words like stones. "Her family. He slaughtered them all." He looked at me and his voice broke. "You are the daughter of Alpha Valerius. You are not an Omega." My head was spinning. Silver Crescent? Valerius? The names meant nothing to me. It felt like they were talking about someone else. "But that's not all, is it?" Seraphina asked, her voice sharp as she pointed to a passage in the journal. The mystic's gaze met mine, and it was filled with a terrible, world-shattering awe. "No," she breathed. "It is not. Child, you are the last of the bloodline. The last lunar singer." The title hung in the air, ancient and heavy with power. The journals explained it all. Kyle hadn't just wanted to break me. He knew what I was. He had silenced my magic, suppressed my heritage, all with one goal in mind. He wanted to twist my power, to break my mind, and to forge me into a living weapon, an amplifier for his own commands, a slave who could control armies with a single stolen note. My life hadn't just been a tragedy. It had been an experiment. Chapter 9. The Siren's Call. The revelation left me hollowed out, a vessel filled with the ghost of a person I never knew. A lunar singer, the daughter of an alpha. It was all just words, meaningless sounds that couldn't penetrate the thick fog of the life I'd actually lived. I was Athena, the Omega, the clumsy, useless thing, How could I be anything else? Harry's rage was a silent, deadly storm in the room. He looked at me with a new, fierce tenderness that was mingled with a profound guilt. He saw me not just as his mate, but as a queen whose throne had been stolen, whose soul had been mutilated. "The sigil," Harry said, his voice a low command aimed at the mystic. "How do we remove it?" The old wolf's expression was grave. "It is not so simple, my king. The brand is woven into her life force, tied with dark magic. To break it will require a profound connection, an act of absolute trust between you and her. As fated mates, you must act as one. You must use your alpha power not to command, but to yield, to pour your strength into her, to burn away the darkness from the inside." She looked at me, her eyes soft with pity. "It will be painful, and it will be dangerous. If your connection falters even for a moment, it could shatter you both." Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in my stomach. Trust him? Trust an alpha, a king, with my very soul? I looked at Harry. I saw the fury in his eyes, but underneath it I saw a desperate plea. He was asking me to trust him. And I thought of his quiet patience, of the way he learned what foods I liked, of the fierce protectiveness in his royal decree. I thought of the small spark of defiance he had awakened in me. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a possibility. I gave a single shaky nod. The ritual was performed that night in a chamber deep beneath the castle, lit only by a circle of glowing moonstones. I lay on a cool stone altar, and Harry knelt beside me. The mystic chanted in a low, ancient tongue. Harry placed his hands over the brand on my chest. His touch was warm, hesitant. "I will not hurt you, Athena," he whispered, and his voice was so raw, so vulnerable, that for a moment I almost believed him. Then he began. Power, raw and golden, flowed from him into me. It felt like fire, a cleansing, agonizing fire that sought out the cold, rotten magic of the sigil. I cried out, my body arching in pain. But through the bond, I felt his pain too. He was feeling echoes of every lash, every cruel word, every lonely night I had ever endured. He was taking my suffering into himself. And in that shared agony, something new was forged. I felt his crushing loneliness, the terrible weight of his crown, his desperate, hopeless search for a mate. I saw him, the real him, and he saw me. With a final, shattering cry, a wave of silver light erupted from my chest. The brand dissolved into nothing but ash. Power, wild, untamed, and overwhelming, flooded my veins. I felt whole. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely whole. The ritual was over. Harry and I lay there, gasping, our souls intertwined. But a few days later, the horror began. A pompous lord, angry about a ruling Harry had made, confronted me in the gardens, blaming me for distracting the king. "Ever since you arrived, this kingdom has been—" "Be silent," I said, a flash of anger surprising me. But the words, they were not just words. Power, cold and absolute, lashed out from me. The lord froze, his eyes widening in terror. He fell to his knees, his body trembling, his will completely and utterly erased. He was a puppet, and I was holding the strings. I stared at him, my heart turning to ice. This was the siren's call, the dark side of my gift. It was the power to dominate, to compel, to control. It was Kale's power, magnified 1,000 times, and it was inside me. Chapter 10. A Cage of Silence. The power was a poison vine, and it was growing inside me. After what I did to that lord in the garden, after feeling his will dissolve under the command of my voice, I retreated. I built a fortress of silence around myself, brick by painful brick. Speaking was a risk I couldn't afford to take. What if I got angry again? What if I was scared? What if I accidentally commanded someone I cared about? The thought made me feel sick. So I stopped talking, completely. My newfound voice, the one I had just started to explore, was now my greatest enemy. This sudden silence created a chasm between me and Harry. He would enter our rooms, and I would flinch away, moving to the far side of the chamber, my back to him as I stared out at the city. The dull ache of the mating bond sharpened into a constant, biting pain. It craved proximity, and while my body was near him, my soul had run 1,000 miles away. He didn't understand. How could he? I saw the confusion in his golden eyes, the way his jaw would tighten. He thought my fear was of him. He thought I was rejecting him after the intimacy of the ritual. "Athena," he would start, his voice rough with a pain that echoed my own. I would just shake my head, wrapping my arms around myself, unable to look at him. I couldn't explain it. If I opened my mouth, what might come out? A plea for help, or an order to leave me alone that he would be magically forced to obey. The risk was too great. My silence was a shield for him as much as it was a prison for me. Have you ever been so terrified of yourself that you would rather hurt the one person you're starting to care about than risk harming them? It's a special kind of hell. Even Lady Seraphina tried to breach my walls. She came to my rooms one afternoon, dismissing the servants with a sharp wave of her hand. She stood beside me at the balcony, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Power is a tool, girl," she said, her voice devoid of its usual coldness. It was just pragmatic. A hammer can be used to build a house or to crush a skull. The hammer feels nothing. The choice belongs to the hand that wields it. Her words made sense, but they felt like they were spoken in a foreign language. My hand was trembling. I didn't feel strong enough to wield a hammer. I felt like I was the hammer, a mindless weapon waiting to fall. My silence was my answer. I could see the frustration in her eyes before she left, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. She had offered a lifeline, but I was too afraid to take it. The worst part was the loneliness. It was a gaping wound, made deeper by Harry's constant aching presence. We were two people in a room, separated by a universe of unspoken fear. I missed his quiet company. I missed the surprising gentleness he had shown me. But the girl he had started to see, the one with a spark of defiance, was gone. I had locked her away. Because the thing that had come out with her, that terrible, compelling power, was a monster. And I would rather be a broken thing in a cage of silence than let that monster roam free. This quiet agony was slowly killing us both, and I didn't know how to make it stop. Chapter 11, Whispers of War. While I was lost in my internal war, a real one was brewing on the horizon. Riders began to arrive from the borderlands, their horses lathered in sweat, their faces grim with bad news. They brought whispers that turned into reports, and reports that turned into alarms. Cale was not licking his wounds in the shadows. He was gathering an army. He was preying on the discontent of the smaller rogue packs, wolves who chafed under the king's unified rule. He promised them plunder, freedom, and a share of the spoils when the great King Hadrian finally fell. But there was something else. Something wrong. The report spoke of the unnatural frenzy of his warriors. They fought with no fear, no self-preservation, their eyes glowing with a feverish feral light. It wasn't just battle rage, it was something darker, something magical. This news pulled Harry away from our silent, painful orbit. He was gone for long stretches of the day, locked in the war room with his commanders. When he did return late at night, he smelled of metal and maps and stress. The weight of his crown was heavy again, and his face was a mask of cold, regal authority. The distance between us grew from a few feet of marble floor to a vast, unconquerable territory. His beta, Gareth, was a constant shadow at his side. I would see them in the hallways, heads bent together, their voices low and urgent. Gareth's expression was always one of deep, loyal concern. He would sometimes glance at me, my silent, ghost-like form, and then turn back to his king, shaking his head with a sorrowful look. I once overheard a fragment of their conversation as I passed an open doorway. "She is a distraction you cannot afford, my king," Gareth was saying, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Look at her. She is lost in her own shadows. Your focus must be on the kingdom, on the war. You cannot be burdened by—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. "By a broken mate." Harry's reply was a low growl, too quiet for me to hear, but the frustration rolling off him was a palpable wave. Gareth was a master of his craft. He wasn't lying. He was just twisting the truth into a different shape. He was using my very real pain as a weapon against me, a tool to pry Harry's attention away from our bond and onto the more important matters of state. It was working. Harry grew more distant, more consumed by the coming storm. The moments of vulnerability I had seen in him were gone, locked away behind the iron mask of a king preparing for battle. I felt like a spectator to my own life, watching through thick, soundproof glass. I saw the castle transforming, guards drilled in the courtyards, their armor clanging in a constant rhythmic beat, healers prepared supplies, their faces drawn and tight. The entire world was mobilizing for a fight, for a cause I was at the center of. Kyle was doing all of this, for me, for the weapon he believed me to be. A terrible, suffocating guilt settled over me. This was my fault. All of it. These people were going to fight, to bleed, to die, because of the power locked inside me. Power I was too terrified to even acknowledge, let alone use. The walls of my silent cage were starting to feel less like a protection and more like a betrayal. Chapter 12. The Traitor's Gambit. The attack came not like a slow tide, but like a tidal wave. It crashed against us without warning, in the dead of night, under the cold light of a half moon. The first sound was a single, mournful blast from the high watchtower, a sound that was cut off with a sickening abruptness. Then, chaos erupted. War horns blared from inside the city walls. Screams echoed up from the lower courtyards. Alarms shrieked, a frantic, clanging heartbeat of pure panic. We weren't being sieged, we were being overrun. Harry burst into our rooms, already clad in his black battle armor. The king was gone, only the warrior remained. His golden eyes were blazing, his movements sharp and efficient. "Stay here, bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. He was about to leave when he paused, his gaze locking with mine. For a single, heart-stopping moment, the fear and distance between us vanished. I saw only the desperate, protective wolf. He took one step toward me, then another, and cupped my face in his hands. "I will come back for you," he swore. It was a promise, a vow. Then he was gone, the sound of his running footsteps swallowed by the rising din of battle. I did as he said, shoving a heavy chest against the doors. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a prayer. Keep him safe. Keep him safe. But I couldn't just sit there. I ran to the balcony, my vantage point giving me a horrifying view of the fight. Kyle's rogues were swarming the main courtyard, their movements frenzied and unnatural, just as the reports had described. But how did they get in? The main gate was still barred. It made no sense. Then I saw him. Harry. A whirlwind of black fury on the battlements, his massive silver sword a blur of motion. He fought with a terrible, beautiful grace, a king defending his home. Beside him, a bulwark of loyalty, was Gareth, his own sword a flashing arc of steel. They were back to back, a legendary team, holding a critical section of the wall against an overwhelming tide of enemies. For a moment, watching them, I felt a flicker of hope. They were invincible together. But then, it happened. Harry lunged, dispatching a rogue with a powerful strike. In that single fleeting moment, his back was exposed. And Gareth moved. It wasn't an attack. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. He failed to block a blow from the side. A rogue's axe, one that Gareth should have easily parried, sliced deep into Harry's unprotected shoulder. Harry roared, staggering back, not just from the pain of the blow, but from the shock of the betrayal. His golden eyes locked on his beta, his brother in arms. And in that moment of stunned disbelief, Gareth didn't press an attack. He did something worse. With a sharp, commanding bark, he signaled to a group of rogues waiting below. "The gate! Now!" My blood ran cold. The postern gate, a small secondary entrance just below their position, creaked open. It had been left unbarred, unprotected. Gareth hadn't just let Harry get hit. He had orchestrated this entire breach. He had sold them all out. As a fresh wave of frenzied warriors poured through the opening, overwhelming the shocked and outnumbered royal guards, I could only stare in horror. The king was wounded, his best friend was a traitor, and the heart of his kingdom was bleeding out before my very eyes. Chapter 13. The King's Gambit. Chaos was a living thing, a monster of screams, clanging steel, and the coppery scent of blood that clawed its way into the castle. The throne room, once a symbol of unshakable power, had become a desperate sanctuary. Harry had fought his way back to me, a wounded lion, his black armor dented and his silver sword dripping crimson. The wound on his shoulder was deep, a ragged tear that bled sluggishly. But his golden eyes were fixed on the doors, burning with a ferocious, protective fire. He shoved me behind the massive throne, his body a shield between me and the splintering wood. "I am with you," he gasped, his breath coming in ragged pants. "Always." The doors didn't just open. They exploded inward, blasted into shards by a force of raw, malevolent power. And standing in the ruined archway, framed by his elite guard, was Alpha Kale. He was grinning, a triumphant, predatory slash in his scarred face. His eyes weren't on the wounded king. They were on me. He saw his prize, his weapon, cowering behind her broken guardian. "Well, well," Kale purred, stepping into the throne room with the confident swagger of a conqueror. "Look at the mighty King Hadrian, brought low by a ghost and a broken toy." He gestured lazily at Harry. "You can't win this, Your Majesty. Your beta was smarter than you. He saw which way the wind was blowing. He chose the winning side." Harry didn't rise to the bait. He just shifted his stance, his sword held ready, his body a silent promise of death to anyone who took another step. He was saving his energy, his focus absolute. Kale's grin widened and his gaze slid back to me. It was a look of such cruel ownership it made my skin crawl. "Don't you want to know why I let you live all those years ago, little bird?" he asked, his voice sickly sweet. "Why I kept the last pup of the Silver Crescent pack as my personal pet?" My blood ran cold. He was talking about the past, about the life I couldn't remember. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, she doesn't even know." He turned his attention to Harry, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "You never told her, did you? About your grand strategy, about the hard choices a king has to make." Kale took a slow, deliberate step forward, savoring the moment. This was his true victory. Not the battle, but this poison he was about to pour into my soul. "Ask him," Kale whispered, his voice echoing in the vast, silent room. "Ask your noble king where his armies were when I tore your pack apart. Ask him why he let the Silver Crescent wolves be slaughtered down to the last pup." I froze. The world tilted, the sounds of battle fading into a dull, distant roar. I looked at Harry, at his proud, defiant face. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his golden eyes. It wasn't just fury. It was guilt, a deep, soul-shattering guilt. The blood drained from my face. It couldn't be. It was a lie, a trick. But Harry's silence was a confession. Kale's voice was triumphant. "He sacrificed you. Your entire family, your home, your name. He threw it all on the fire to win his pathetic little war. A tactical decision, I believe he called it." He looked at me, and his smile was the cruelest thing I had ever seen. "You see, little bird? You fled one monster only to run into the arms of another. He saved you from your cage, only because he was the one who built it in the first place. The The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, shattering the fragile trust I had just begun to build. The man who had saved me was the architect of my damnation. My world didn't just break, it ceased to exist. Chapter 14. The Surrender of a King. The silence that followed Cale's revelation was a living entity. It was heavier than stone, colder than ice. It was the sound of a soul breaking. I stared at Harry, and the man I had started to see, the lonely king, the gentle protector, the vulnerable mate, vanished. All I could see was the alpha who had made a tactical decision. He had weighed my family's lives on a scale and found them wanting. My deepest, most primal fear, the one that had been beaten into me for years, roared to the surface. All alphas were the same. They used power to break things. They used people like pawns. Cale used his fists. Harry used a map. What was the difference? My pain must have been a physical thing, a scent in the air, because Harry flinched as if I'd struck him. The fury in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a look of such raw, agonizing despair that it stole my breath. It was a worse wound than the gash in his shoulder. Cale saw it too. He laughed, ready to press his advantage, ready to order his wolves forward to finish the job. But Harry didn't seem to notice him anymore. Cale and his army, the battle, the fate of his kingdom, it all faded away. His entire world narrowed to me, to the chasm of betrayal that had just opened between us. Athena, he breathed, my name a prayer and a curse on his lips. And then he did something that no alpha, no king should ever do. He surrendered. He let the tip of his silver sword dip until it scraped against the marble floor. With a clang that echoed like a final broken bell, he let it fall from his grip. It skittered across the stone, a useless piece of metal. He was unarmed, wounded, and his eyes never left mine. He took a staggering step forward, not toward Cale, but toward me. "He is right," Harry said, his voice raw, broken. "As a king, I made a choice. A cold, calculated decision that led to the death of your family, and I have to live with that for eternity." Cale's jaw dropped. His warriors hesitated, confused by this bizarre turn of events. This wasn't how a cornered king was supposed to act. Harry kept walking toward me, his movements slow, deliberate. He was ignoring the armed enemies surrounding him, his focus so absolute it was a force of nature. "But as a male," he continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "as your mate. Seeing the pain in your eyes right now is a wound far deeper than any Cale could ever give me." He stopped just before the throne, just before me. He didn't try to touch me. He just stood there, completely open, completely vulnerable. "I don't care about the crown," he whispered, and every wolf in the room heard him. "I don't care about this castle, or this kingdom. It is all ashes without you." He slowly sank to one knee, not in fealty to a conqueror, but in supplication to his mate. The Alpha King knelt. "I will not ask for your forgiveness. I have not earned it," he said, his golden eyes shining with unshed tears. "But I am begging you to believe this one thing. My love for you here now is the only truth I have left. Everything else can burn." It was the ultimate sacrifice, not of his life, but of his pride, his power, his very identity as a king. He was offering me all the broken pieces of his soul, asking for nothing in return. And in that single, impossible moment of surrender, he shattered every rule I thought I knew about power, about alphas, and about the world. Chapter 15. The Queen's Choice. I stared down at the kneeling king, and the universe inside me tilted. Cale's words had been a perfect cage, built from the iron bars of my past trauma. All alphas are the same. It was a simple, terrible truth that had governed my life. But Harry's surrender, his raw, desperate vulnerability, was a key. It was a truth that didn't fit inside the cage. Cale's power was in taking, in controlling, in breaking others to make himself bigger. Harry, the most powerful wolf on the continent, was showing me that true strength could be found in sacrifice, in letting go. The words of his sister, Lady Seraphina, echoed in my mind. The choice belongs to the hand that wields it. In that moment, I understood. The siren's call, the terrifying power of compulsion inside me, was Kale's way. It was the power to dominate, to erase choice. But the other side of my gift, the side I had been too afraid to explore, was the power to heal, to inspire, to create. That was a different kind of power entirely. That was a queen's power. Kale, seeing his psychological victory slipping away, finally lost his patience. "Enough of this pathetic drama!" he roared. "Seize them! I want her alive!" His warriors surged forward, but as they did, I made my choice. I stepped out from behind the throne. I looked not at Kale, but at the kneeling king before me. I reached out and gently touched Harry's cheek. His eyes fluttered shut at my touch, a shudder running through him. "Rise, my king," I whispered, and my voice. It wasn't the broken whisper of an omega. It wasn't the terrifying command of a siren. It was something new. It was steady. It was calm. It was the voice of a woman who was done being afraid. Harry looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, fragile hope. He slowly rose to his feet, his gaze never leaving mine. I turned to face Kale. The fear was still there, a cold snake in my belly, but it no longer had control. "You are wrong, Kale," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that silenced the advancing warriors. "You wanted a weapon. You wanted a monster." I took a deep breath, feeling the power well up inside me, no longer a poison, but a vast, untapped reservoir. "But you didn't get one." Without another word, I turned away from him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. I walked toward the ruined doorway, toward the sounds of battle and the screams of the dying. Harry immediately moved to follow, to shield me. "Athena, no, it's too dangerous." I paused and looked back at him, and for the first time I gave him a true, genuine smile. "The most dangerous thing in this castle is already on our side," I said. My plan was simple, it was terrifying, and it was mine. I would not hide in the shadows. I would not cower behind a throne. I would not use my power to become the tyrant he tried to make me. I would walk into the heart of the battle, and I would show them all what a lunar singer truly was. I would show them the power not of a weapon, but of a queen. The final battle for the kingdom was about to be fought, but the war for my own soul, that was already won. Chapter 16. The Rampart's Song. The journey through the castle was a journey through a nightmare. The grand hallways I had drifted through in silent fear were now scarred by battle. Tapestries were torn, suits of armor lay scattered like fallen soldiers, and the chilling sounds of fighting echoed from every corridor. But my fear was different now. It was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was a cold, sharp stone in my belly, a weight that grounded me, focused me. Harry was a whirlwind of protective fury at my side, his silver sword a blur of motion. He didn't try to stop me or question my plan. He just trusted me. That trust was a shield more powerful than any armor. His royal guards formed a diamond around us, a moving fortress of black and silver, their faces grim, their loyalty absolute. We moved with a singular purpose, the high ramparts of the central keep. It was the heart of the castle, a place that overlooked the main courtyard where the battle raged at its most brutal. Every step was a fight. Rogues, their eyes glowing with that unnatural, feverish light, would burst from doorways or charge down staircases. They were fast, frenzied, and fought with a desperate strength. But Harry's guards were better. They were a disciplined, deadly unit, and with their king at the center, they were an unbreakable wall. I saw a young guard go down, a rogue's dagger finding a gap in his armor. He cried out, a sound of pain and surprise. Without thinking, I knelt beside him, my hand hovering over his wound. I didn't know what to do, but a strange instinct guided me. I let a single soft note escape my lips. Not a song, just a hum. A faint silver light glowed from my palm, and the bleeding on the soldier's side slowed, the edges of the wound knitting together just slightly. It wasn't a full healing, but it was something. A miracle. The guard stared at me with wide, awestruck eyes. Harry saw it too, and the look he gave me was filled with a fierce, wondering pride. It strengthened my resolve. This was what my power was for. As we fought our way up the final spiral staircase, the sounds of the main battle grew louder, a terrible symphony of roars, screams, and clashing steel. The air grew thick with the smell of blood and smoke. My every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to find a safe place to hide. The Omega inside me, the part that had survived by being small and silent, was terrified. But the Queen, the woman who had made a choice in the throne room, kept walking. She put one foot in front of the other, climbing toward the sky, toward the heart of the storm. Finally, we reached the top. Harry kicked open the heavy oak door, and the wind hit me like a physical blow, whipping my hair across my face and tearing the breath from my lungs. The sky was a bruised canvas of gray and orange, lit by the fires burning in the city below. The entire courtyard was a swirling, chaotic sea of fighting wolves. It was a vision of hell. The noise was overwhelming. The sheer scale of the violence was staggering. For a moment, my courage faltered. I was just one person, a girl with a ghost of a lullaby. What could I possibly do against all of this? Then I felt Harry's hand on my back, a solid, steady warmth. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was with me. And that was enough. I took a deep, shuddering breath, walked to the edge of the stone battlement, and prepared to sing. Chapter 17. The Tide Turner. Standing on the edge of the world, with the wind screaming in my ears and the battle raging below, I felt a strange and terrible calm settle over me. This was it. The moment my entire life, the one I remembered and the one I didn't, had led to. There was no more running, no more hiding. I closed my eyes, not to retreat into darkness, but to find the light inside me. I didn't search for the phantom lullaby this time. I reached deeper, for the source of the music itself. I gathered all the broken pieces of my soul, the terror of the Omega, the pride of the Alpha's daughter, the confusion of the mate, the fury of the survivor, and I prepared to give them a voice. The first note was not a whisper. It soared from me, pure and clear and powerful, cutting through the din of battle like a silver arrow. It was a note of profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. It sang of a pack lost to fire and ambition, of a little girl who lost her name, of years spent in silence and fear. The sound washed over the courtyard, and for a moment, the fighting seemed to falter. Heads, both friend and foe, turned upward. Then the melody changed. The sorrow deepened into a resonant chord of strength. I sang of the first spark of defiance, of the quiet no that had changed my world. I sang of the king who had knelt, of a love that was forged in truth and sacrifice. My voice grew stronger, the notes weaving together to form a complex harmony of pain and hope. A visible shimmer, a wave of soft, silver light, pulsed out from me, expanding with every beat of the song. It was not a weapon. It was a revelation. When the silver light washed over Harry's warriors, they felt it like a drink of cool water on a scorching day. Their exhaustion began to fade. The burning in their muscles eased. Minor cuts and scrapes sealed over, the skin knitting itself back together. Their spirits, worn down by the brutal fighting, surged with a renewed wave of courage and hope. They roared, a single unified sound of defiance, and they began to push the enemy back with a strength they hadn't possessed moments before. But when the light touched Kale's rogues, the effect was devastatingly different. My song did not harm them. It healed them. It washed away the dark, feral magic that had been poured into them, the magic that drove their unnatural frenzy. The feverish, glowing light in their eyes flickered and died, replaced by confusion, by fear, by horror at the carnage surrounding them. They were no longer a mindless horde, they were just lost wolves. Their charge broke. Some dropped their weapons and fled. Others simply stared at their blood-soaked hands, dazed and horrified. I poured everything I had into the melody, my voice soaring over the castle, a beacon in the smoky twilight. I was the lunar singer, and this was my song. It was not a weapon of domination or control. It was a song of truth. It reminded the broken of their pain, and it reminded the courageous of their strength. It didn't win the war. It simply ended the battle. It cleared the board, leaving only the two kings standing in the middle of the chaos, their true natures exposed for all to see. Chapter 18. The Alpha's Duel. My song tapered off, the last note hanging in the suddenly quiet air like a silver star. Below, the courtyard was a strange, still tableau. My allies stood tall, breathing heavily but filled with a new light. The enemy was in disarray, their magical rage extinguished, their will to fight broken. And in the very center of it all, surrounded by a circle of stunned wolves, stood two alphas. One was filled with a righteous, holy fury. The other was filled with nothing but raw, cornered hate. Kale stared up at me, his face a twisted mask of disbelief and rage. I had not been the weapon he'd expected. I had been his undoing. He let out a guttural roar of pure frustration and turned his burning eyes on the one person left for him to blame: Harry. With the battle's tide turned, Harry no longer needed to defend. He now had the freedom to attack. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying to behold, his silver sword held low. He wasn't a king anymore. He was an executioner. His movements were a blur of speed and power, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. "This ends now, Kyle." Harry's voice was a low growl, a promise of impending doom. The duel was nothing like the chaotic skirmishes of the battle. It was brutal, personal, and primal. It was a dance of death between two apex predators. Kyle was a savage fighter, his movements fueled by desperation and rage. He swung his heavy axe in wide, powerful arcs designed to maim and crush. But Harry was a master. He was grace and fury combined. He moved like the winter storm that was his scent, his sword a flashing icicle that deflected, parried, and struck with deadly precision. From my perch on the ramparts, I watched with my heart in my throat. Every clang of steel on steel, every guttural roar sent a fresh wave of terror through me. This was the raw, untamed violence of their world, the part I had always feared. But seeing Harry now, I understood. His violence wasn't for the love of cruelty. It was for the love of his people, for the love of his home, for me. He wasn't a monster. He was a guardian. The end came swiftly. Kale, growing more desperate, overextended himself in a wild, clumsy swing. Harry saw the opening. He sidestepped the blow, the axe head burying itself in the stone pavers. In that single, unprotected moment, Harry moved. He didn't hesitate. His sword flashed upward in a silvery arc, a clean, precise strike. Kale froze, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He looked down, at the wound blossoming across his chest. He looked back up at Harry, his mouth opening as if to speak. But no words came out. He just fell. He collapsed to the stone floor, his reign of terror ending not with a roar, but with a quiet final thud. Silence. A profound, ringing silence descended upon the courtyard, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the moans of the wounded. The war was over. Kale was dead. I looked at Harry, who stood panting over the body of his rival, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He slowly looked up, his golden eyes finding mine across the distance. We had won. But as I looked out at the broken bodies and the smoldering ruins of his city, I knew the battle was over, but the fight to heal, that had only just begun. Chapter 19. The Weight of a Crown. The silence after the storm was the most brutal sound of all. It was a hollow, ringing void filled with the ghosts of battle cries and the soft, terrible sounds of weeping. The sun began to rise, painting the smoke-filled sky in pale shades of gray and pink, a dawn that felt like a bruise. The courtyard was a ruin, a testament to the night's savagery. Healers moved like pale spirits among the fallen, their hands glowing with soft light as they worked to mend the broken bodies of our warriors. I walked among them, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't a queen, not yet. I was just a wolf with a quiet song. I would kneel by a wounded soldier, hum a low, gentle melody, and watch as the silver light from my hands eased their pain and helped seal their wounds. Harry stood in the center of the devastation, and he was no longer my mate, my protector, or the vulnerable wolf who had knelt before me. He was the king. The weight of his crown was a visible thing, settling on his shoulders, straightening his spine, hardening his jaw. His face was a mask of cold, grim authority. He was surveying the cost of his victory, and the price had been steep. He gave orders with a quiet, clipped efficiency. Send patrols to hunt down the scattered rogues. Double the guard on the walls. Set up a triage for the wounded in the Great Hall. It was a litany of command, the necessary, brutal calculus of leadership. Then, they brought Gareth to him. The former Beta was in chains, his proud shoulders slumped, his face bruised and streaked with grime. 2 massive royal guards held him, but he wasn't fighting. The fire in him was gone, leaving only embers of a deep, sorrowful bitterness. He was brought before Harry, and the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. This was more than justice. It was a reckoning. It was the tearing apart of a brotherhood. Why? Harry's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was colder and sharper than any sword. Gareth lifted his head, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, tragic certainty. Because love makes you weak, he rasped, his voice raw. I watched it happen to my Alara. Her bond to me made her hesitate in battle, for a single fatal second. I watched her die because of it. He looked at me then, his gaze filled not with hate but with a profound, twisted pity. And I saw it happening to you. This obsession, this weakness. She would have been your downfall. I did it to save the kingdom, to save you from yourself. What could anyone say to that? His logic was born from a pain so deep it had warped his soul. He had tried to prevent a tragedy by creating another one. He genuinely believed he was the hero of his own story. I felt a pang of sorrow for the man he must have been before his heart was broken. Harry listened, his expression unmoving. He was a statue of judgment, carved from black rock and grief. When Gareth was finished, the king was silent for a long moment. Then he finally spoke, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard, clear and absolute. You speak of strength, Harry said, his voice dangerously soft. But you betrayed your alpha, your pack, and your king, all because you were afraid of a memory. You let your pain fester into poison. He looked at his former friend, and for the first time, a flicker of his own agony showed through the mask. You are the weakest wolf I have ever known. He turned to his guards. Take him to the dungeons. He will await his sentence. As they dragged Gareth away, Harry's shoulders slumped, just for a second. The king was gone, and for a brief, heartbreaking moment, it was just a male who had lost his brother. Chapter 20. Scars and Silver Linings. Later, when the most urgent duties were done and a temporary, exhausted quiet had settled over the castle, we were finally alone. We were in his private chambers, not my gilded cage. A fire crackled in the hearth, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had settled deep in our bones. Harry had shed his battered armor. He was in a simple tunic, and the healers had cleaned and bound the wound on his shoulder. He looked diminished. The raw power of the Alpha King was gone, replaced by the weary, bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had survived a war only to find another one waiting in his own heart. He stood by the window, staring out at the scarred city below. I sat in a chair by the fire, the silence between us a living thing, filled with all the words we needed to say. The ghost of Cale's final poisonous revelation was in the room with us. He sacrificed you. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and rough. I was 24 years old, he began, not turning to look at me. My father had just died. The packs were tearing each other apart like starving dogs. I was barely a king, just a young alpha trying to hold a crumbling world together. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The intelligence said Cale's Shadow Moon pack was about to move on a strategic pass in the mountains. At the same time, a much larger force of rebels was preparing to sack the western farmlands, the kingdom's breadbasket. I didn't have the warriors to stop both. He was not making excuses. He was just telling me. His voice was flat, a recitation of a memory he had probably replayed in his mind 1,000 times. The Silver Crescent pack was small, isolated, and of no strategic value. The farmlands fed tens of thousands. The choice... He trailed off, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. The choice was clear, logical. I sent my main force west, I saved the harvest, and I left your pack to die. He finally turned to face me, and his golden eyes were filled with a self-loathing that was more profound than any apology. I didn't know their name. I didn't know about their alpha or his daughter or the magic in her blood. They were just numbers on a map, a necessary loss, and that is a truth I will carry to my grave. I listened, and I felt the old familiar anger and pain rise up. But it was different now. I looked at the man before me, a king who had just admitted to the terrible, cold calculus of his power. And I looked at the mate who had been willing to kneel, to surrender that same power all for me. The two were not the same. One was a boy trying to save a world. The other was a man trying to save his soul. Could I blame the man for the impossible choice the boy had to make? I rose from my chair and slowly walked toward him. I stopped just before him and reached out, my fingers gently tracing the edge of the bandages on his shoulder. He flinched, but not from pain. It was the touch he thought he didn't deserve. I looked into his eyes, and I let him see everything in mine, the pain, the sorrow, the memory of my lost family, and the forgiveness. That king is not the wolf I love, I whispered. A single tear tracked its way down his cheek. He leaned his forehead against mine, his entire body trembling with the release of a guilt he had carried for years. The mating bond, which had been a chain of pain and a chasm of betrayal, flared between us, warm and bright and whole. It was no longer just a fate the goddess had given us. It was a choice we had made. A future we had decided to build together, on a foundation of scarred but mended truth. Chapter 21. The Queen's Song. 6 months later, the kingdom was healing. The scars on the city were fading, replaced by the sight of new stone and fresh timber. The deeper wounds, the ones in the hearts of the people, were taking longer, but they were mending. The winter had been hard, but spring was finally arriving, a gentle promise of warmth and new life blooming in the gardens of the royal castle. I walked through those gardens now, not as a prisoner, but as their queen. The title no longer felt like a stolen coat. It felt right. My life was no longer one of silent fear. It was filled with purpose. I spent my mornings with the healers, using my gift not as a weapon of war, but as a tool of peace. My song could soothe the lingering trauma in a warrior's mind, ease the phantom pains of a lost limb, and bring a quiet comfort to the families who had lost so much. They didn't call me the siren or the weapon. They called me their hope singer. I sat on the council beside Harry, my voice no longer hesitant, but clear and steady. I spoke for the common wolves, for the families, for the pups. I was the heart to his crown, the compassion that tempered his strength. Harry was a different king now. The cold, lonely mask was gone, replaced by a warmth and a confidence that came not just from power, but from peace. He smiled more. He laughed. He ruled not just with his mind, but with his heart. Our bond was no longer a painful chain, but a quiet, constant hum beneath our skin, a source of shared strength and comfort. He had faced the darkest part of his past and had survived. We both had. One evening, we stood on the balcony of our chambers, the same balcony where I had once huddled in fear. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming moon-petal flowers from the gardens below. The city lights twinkled like a fallen constellation. I leaned back against his chest, his arms wrapping around me, his hand resting gently on the slight, firm swell of my belly. Our pup, our future, was a tiny, fluttering life growing safely inside me. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his chin resting on the top of my head. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I'm thinking about songs," I said. "About how my first song in this kingdom was one of pain, meant to humiliate me." His arms tightened around me, a silent apology for a memory that still held a faint sting. "But it's funny," I continued, turning to look up at him, my heart filled with a love so vast it felt like it could light up the entire sky. "Because that song, the one meant to be my end, it was really our beginning." He leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss filled with all the battles we had survived and all the peaceful dawns we had yet to share. "Then sing for me now, my love," he whispered against my lips. "Sing for our beginning." And I did. I lifted my head to the rising moon, and I sang. It wasn't a song of sorrow or of war. It was a quiet, hopeful melody of a kingdom reborn, of a king who found his heart, and of a queen who finally found her voice.